This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Saltzbaugh, and I am with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's Peer and Family Support Program. I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar on motivational interviewing and peer mentoring. Thank you all so much for joining us. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to our presenter, Dr. Tyler Brown. Dr. Brown joined Shepherd Center in August of 2020 as a rehabilitation psychologist. He earned his BS in psychology at Lander University in Greenwood, South Carolina, an MS in psychology at Augusta State University, and his MS in clinical medical psychology and PsyD in clinical psychology at Mercer University in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Brown completed his clinical internship at Wichita State Counseling Center and Kansas University's School of Medicine, Wichita, and as part of the Wichita Collaborative Psychology Internship Program. He completed his postdoctoral fellowship at MedStar National Rehabilitation Hospital in Washington, D.C. As a rehabilitation psychologist at Shepherd, Dr. Brown has a passion for providing evidence-based treatment to individuals and their families dealing with a variety of complex medical conditions, including spinal cord injury, acquired brain injury, multiple sclerosis, chronic pain, and amputation. Dr. Brown is also an adjunct professor at Mercer University. So before we begin, just to let you know, we do have closed captioning available. You can just click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for Dr. Brown, please feel free to put them into the question and answer box. And finally, we will have an interactive portion at the end of our webinar. If you'd like to participate in that particular part of the webinar, you can use the raise hand function, and I will unmute you and let everybody take a turn chiming in. That'll occur towards the end of today's webinar. And with that, I'll hand things over to Dr. Brown.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here again. I love doing these things, so I hope you get a lot out of it. Let's see, let's go ahead and get started. So in terms of disclosures or anything like that, no one's still really throwing me a lot of money, so I don't have any disclosures. No pharmaceutical companies are representing me or anything like that today. So let's see here. It's moving kind of slow. Give me 1 second. There we go. So let's start off by talking a little bit about the history and background for motivational interviewing. I'm sure it's a term that you've heard of or a concept you've heard of, but I think it's got a really interesting backstory. So it was started in the 1980s by William Miller and Stephen Rolnick. It was really used as treatment for substance use disorders. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things about motivational interviewing, because when someone has a substance use disorder, that tends to be something that's highly stigmatizing. And these researchers kind of recognized that. They realized that, one, it was really hard to get people to quit their substance use disorder or to help them. And then recognizing that stigma and judgment around the issue was a major contributor to that. So having patients who might have a lot of ambivalence about their substance use disorder, and then having someone come in who's just sort of preaching at them or yelling at them or judging them for what's going on in their life. Really old models of things like substance use disorder really were stigmatizing in the way that people would believe that, well, it was just weak character or weak mind, and that's what contributed to the problem. So the other thing that Miller and Rolnick kind of recognized was that there were some power dynamic issues there, right? And now one of the issues that often would emerge would you'd have this authority figure versus a subordinate. So you would have somebody who was perceived as kind of the white coat, authority figure in the room, dealing with somebody with substance issue disorder. So it didn't feel very collaborative. It's just one person with higher power talking down to someone with perceived lower power. So in terms of the definition of motivational interviewing, just to kind of have a framework for what we'll be talking about today, it's a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication with particular attention to the language of change. It is designed to strengthen personal motivation for and commitment to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change. That's very important. We'll talk about that in a minute, within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. So our role is really to provide an open, compassionate environment that a person can feel safe to talk about their issue with, and in a way where we can look for what they're using in their language to suggest that those might be motivators for change. So some characteristics of motivational interviewing that are really important to discuss up front. One, it's important to think of motivational interviewing as a guiding style of communication that kind of sits comfortably between following and directing, right? So we're not necessarily asking someone just to follow us. We're not just leading them. We're asking them to kind of lead us. We're leading them in some ways, and that's where that collaborative piece kind of comes from. We're not pushing them. What's the old adage? You know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. That's kind of the idea behind that. Like, we can lead and we can provide guidance and assistance, but we can't be the ones that get the person there. They have to be the catalyst for their own change. Motivational interviewing is designed to empower people to change by drawing out their own sense of purpose, meaning, and what their perceived capacity for change is. So to this extent, what we're not doing is imposing our will on clients, right? So it's not up to me to say, you need to make this change. This is unhealthy for you. You should do something different. This would be better for you. Do this. So I'm not imposing my own will. It's about helping the client see their own motivations. And then finally, motivational interviewing is based on a respectful collaboration and sort of a curiosity. So we're being with people in a way that facilitates their natural process for change and in a way that honors the client's autonomy, right? They have a choice to change or not to change. That's up to them. So we're going to be respectful of that choice. And a lot of our role, earlier I used the term judgmental. So it's not about judgment, but it's about curiosity. It's kind of like, well, okay, I see where you're coming from and what you're telling me about why, you know, you engage in this thing. Let's keep using substance use as an example. You know, I'm wondering what life would look like if you didn't have this in your life, you know, or, you know, what do you think you might need to change? So it's more about kind of being this curious scientist with them than it is dictating what they're doing or judging what they're doing. So we're not being judgmental or condescending toward the clients. So next, let's talk a little bit about who motivational interviewing is good for, right? What kind of clients can benefit from motivational interviewing? Typically, we see people where ambivalence is quite high. So the client feels maybe stuck or mixed about making a change. So again, kind of going back to the roots of motivational interviewing, if we're talking about substance abuse, well, it's a really tough habit to kick. I just can't seem to get over it. I've tried to quit before. Or, yeah, I can see how it's hurt me in a lot of ways, but it's kind of helped me in some ways too, right? It helps me forget about my problems. Feels good, it connects me to my peer group, whatever it may be. So there's this ambivalence. I can kind of recognize that I need to make a change, but I'm not quite ready to make that change yet for a variety of reasons. Another sort of population that motivational interviewing can really be beneficial for are people where their confidence is low. So the client doesn't think that they actually have the skill or the ability to make the change. So this can be someone who's like, I completely recognize this is totally bad for me and I wish I could change, but I'm just not very good at it. I'm weak. I don't really have anything in place that's going to help me actually make this change. The next group are for people where desire is low. So they don't know that they necessarily want change, or maybe they can't necessarily see the consequences for change. I feel like I've seen this a lot in like smoking cessation, where I've been working with people who are in sort of a pre-contemplative stage of change, where they're kind of like, yeah, I mean, I know that there's some health risks associated with that, but I don't really think that's going to apply to me. Like, it hasn't really affected me yet. And even though that's true for other people, it might not be true for me. And then finally, it can be really good for people where the importance of the change seems low to them at that moment. So whatever perceived benefits we might recognize of them changing, and whatever current disadvantages they might be facing because of the behavior, that might be unclear or potentially inverted to the client. So, okay, I don't really recognize how this thing I'm doing is affecting myself or other people. It doesn't seem to be bad. Or inverted, maybe it's, okay, I can recognize that what I'm doing is bad, but the benefits of what I'm doing seem to outweigh whatever disadvantages there are. So just to speak very briefly about some of the research and how motivational interviewing has been used, like I said, it was developed in the 1980s for substance use, but since then it has taken off like crazy. So it's been used in many different settings. The government has funded lots and lots and lots of research to look and see how motivational interviewing works in different domains. And the good news is research typically has found that it works pretty much across anything that it's been implemented for. So it's been used in public health settings, medical care settings, it's been used in the criminal justice system, it's been used in educational capacities, sport motivational capacities, and even in parenting. In terms of dealing with like spinal cord injury specifically, I've read articles and seen where it's been used to facilitate improve compliance with like physical activity, discontinuing medications like pain medications and things like that, or trying to get people to wean off of certain kind of medications, you name it, and motivational interviewing has probably been used for it. Even when I was preparing for this talk, I ran across an article where a group of researchers used it in a pediatric population for medication compliance for children that were chronically constipated, right? So you want to talk about maybe like the most specific use of motivational interviewing that you could think of, and it was effective for that. Now to switch gears here a little bit, I want to start to get into some of the meat and potatoes of motivational interviewing. So kind of think what you're here for today, right? How can motivational interviewing help you work better with your peers? And how can you implement specific strategies to take home with you? So the first thing that we need to recognize are the stages of change. And you may have seen these used in other contexts. These are often also called the trans-theoretical model of change. So the first step of change is essentially pre-contemplation, right? This is someone who's unaware of their consequences and haven't really considered change. So this is the person who says, well, this thing isn't really a problem for me. I don't consider my smoking to be a health risk. I've never even considered to quit smoking. It's not on my radar. Then the next stage is contemplation. So this is someone who can acknowledge that they have a problem, but might not have the confidence or don't really fully perceive the disadvantages of what they're doing, right? So yeah, it would be good if I make this change. It could lead to a lot of positive things in my life. I really don't feel like I'm ready yet, or I don't really know where I'd start or begin. So there's at least some thought that what needs to change, but I'm not quite implementing any strategies or doing extensive research yet. The next stage is preparation. So this is someone who has a commitment to change, but may be willing to take kind of small steps, right? So they're like, okay, so you're right, I need to change this thing. I don't really know where to start, but maybe we could look at a couple of things, right? I might be willing to start the first couple of things that you would suggest. So they're starting to get much closer to implementing change. The next stage is action. So this is someone who has begun to take those small steps and has started to implement those small steps. And now they're creating sort of a larger plan, right? They're starting to recognize how their small steps and goals are going to lead to this bigger plan to say, okay, now I'm going to achieve my bigger long-term goal. Then the next stage is maintenance. So after action. So that's someone who is placing their plan into motion with their clear plan. So they've prepared, they've enacted their plan, and then comes maintenance. So maintenance just is someone who's maintaining that new behavior as consistently as possible. Ideally, this is the last stage, right? In a perfect world, that's what we do. We create a plan, we implement a plan, and then we have permanent change. Now, usually, and especially for anybody in here who's maybe ever tried a diet plan or an exercise, that doesn't always go perfectly, right? So that's when relapse comes into effect. So this is a person who's lapsed back into their old behavior. They may feel a sense of disappointment or failure, and they might need reassurance or skills to reaffirm what their goals are. I've often found when I'm working with people in this stage, the disappointment can almost lead to catastrophizing. So this might be someone who goes, oh, well, now my entire plan's out the window. I'm starting from scratch, like the whole thing was pointless. Might be someone who's being really hard on themselves. So I think this is a time for us to sort of remind them of, well, you already had success one time, you can have success again. And in a way, you're really not starting over. Since you've already had success and you already have a plan, we just need to kind of pick back up where we left off and maybe try to find where the holes in the plan are and implement some new strategies to kind of patch those holes. Now to talk a little bit about the guiding principles of motivational interviewing and what's really directing or dictating the change that we're looking for. One thing that you'll learn to appreciate about motivational interviewing is that it has a lot of acronyms, which if you're an acronym-minded person and you really like to learn acronyms, or if they help you remember things, you're going to love motivational interviewing. So the first acronym we'll work with today is RULE. And this is just to help remember those guiding principles. The first guiding principle is to resist the righting reflex. So the righting reflex is just that tendency, that natural urge we have when we're trying to help someone with a problem, just fix the problem for them, right? So someone comes to us and says like, hey, I really want to fix this. And we're like, well, have you tried this, this, and this, and this? Maybe this would be a good change for you. Maybe you need to try this, right? We want to fix that for them. The problem, especially with someone who maybe has a degree of ambivalence about the change, is that this can really create a paradoxical effect, right? So when someone is ambivalent, and maybe a way to think about this is sort of what we call like the Romeo and Juliet effect, or like when you're like dealing with a teenager and you're trying to get them to do something, the more you push, the harder they push back, right? So when we're feeling ambivalent and we're wanting to maintain the status quo and someone is trying to compel us to change, sometimes we just kind of dig our heels in and want to really reaffirm the reasons we're doing the behavior to begin with. So again, if we're talking about substance abuse, it's like, okay, well, you know, you're kind of imposing your will on me, but you know, this thing I'm doing makes me feel better. It makes me feel good about myself, or temporarily makes me feel good. It makes me forget about my problems. So they're going to think about all the ways that maintaining that behavior is a good idea. The next thing is to understand the other person, the client's motives for wanting to change, right? What are their reasons for wanting to implement that change? So not our own, and not us instilling our will in other people, but listening for the things that are going to help them want to change. So if we understand what their interests are, what their concerns are, and what their values are, we can understand where the motivation to change will come from. If it's always been my lifelong dream to run a marathon, then it might behoove me to quit smoking because I might become a much more effective runner if I can manage to quit smoking. The next one, L, listen with empathy. So a general rule of thumb that you'll see in a lot of motivational interviewing research is equal amounts of time should be spent talking and listening, right? So at any point we recognize that we might be talking too much or need to take a step back, that can be a time to sort of reflect and say, all right, I've said a whole lot right now. I've thrown a whole lot at you. I just want to give you a second to tell me a little bit about how you're reacting to what I'm saying, what your thoughts and emotions right now might be in terms of what we're talking about. And I think that this also helps a lot with the previous steps, right? We can't understand what a person's motives are if we aren't listening to them or we're just talking at them. So coming back to how this should be a collaboration. And the last one, the E in rule, is empower. So change and positive outcomes are only likely to occur when the patient or the client we're working with feels like they're an active participant in the change, right? So I need to feel like I am involved in the decision making and that this is my choice to change. And also I need to feel a sense that I can do this, that I can make this change and I can succeed at this change. So by exploring their motivation to change, our ability to discuss the client's perceived barriers and their client's perceived motives, we can empower them to move forward. So some other guiding principles that are closely related, you'll often also see the acronym DRES pop up. The first is to explore discrepancies. That's a major point of motivational interviewing. So we're trying to help them identify or see the discrepancies between whatever their behavior is now and that future goal. Again, to kind of go back to my silly example, if I want to run a marathon, but I've never done that, and maybe I'm an active smoker, it might be a therapist's job working with me to kind of get me to see that discrepancy. It's like, well, you say that you want to run a marathon, but I'm kind of observing you engaging in this behavior, right? And when you smoke, that kind of hurts your lung capacity. So if you keep smoking and your lung capacity is reduced, how are you ever going to achieve that down the road? So kind of gently pointing out those discrepancies that maybe I'm aware of or maybe I'm unaware of. The next one that you'll hear a lot in motivational interviewing research is rolling with resistance, right? So this is that tendency for the person you're working with to dig their heels in and not really want to change. So we have to resist that urge to move them too quickly. It goes back to the last slide. This comes out of a good place. We want to help this person and we want to help them now. We see them hurting. We see that maybe what they're doing is self-destructive or harmful, and we want to get them to that better place immediately. The problem is doing that can be what's perceived as that pushiness that can cause the client to really want to just settle in and not make the change. So this often develops because the relationship to the client feels coercive or authoritarian. It's you telling me what I need to do with my life, or it's you trying to tell me what I need to do with my life, right? So I don't have any autonomy in that. I don't feel like I get to be a part of that conversation. You're telling me what I need to be doing. So resistance can manifest itself as things like interrupting, arguing, you don't know what you're talking about, like that's not my life. Dismissiveness of the severity of the issues, like you're saying this is a big deal, I don't see this as a big deal. Or blaming, right? Okay, well this is a problem, but it's not a problem I caused. This is everyone else's problem. So rolling with resistance is really about approaching without judgment and understanding the client's views may be different than our own. And we don't even have to agree 100% to be able to implement change, right? There might be sticking points where it's kind of like, well, I don't necessarily agree with you there, but let's agree to disagree kind of attitude. So things that can really help roll with resistance, simple reflection of the resistance. Like, well, you know, I see right now you're getting really upset or angry with me. I just want you to kind of tell me what that's about a little bit. Emphasis of their choice. So, hey, I just wanted to talk to you about change, or just see if this is something to ever consider. Ultimately, anything you decide is your decision, and I want to respect that. Shifting the focus. So saying, kind of almost like taking a time out a little bit. I can see that's an area that you really don't want to talk about right now, and I don't want to violate that or your privacy. So maybe let's talk about something else, or kind of move on. And then finally, reframing what they've said, right? So just kind of pointing it back out to them, what they've said to you, and sort of reflect on what that might mean to them. The next one, expressing empathy. So we talked about listening with empathy. Well, now we need to be able to express empathy, right? So to be able to take those reflective listening skills and seek to understand the person from whatever their own experiences, feelings, and values are. So we'll talk a little bit about ORS in a minute, which is a specific strategy that you can use to express empathy. So not only are we trying to listen empathetically, but the client really needs to feel that we understand what they're going through, right? Or we can relate back to them. And I think every one of us has had some moment in our life where someone has given us a reflective statement, or just said like, hey, it sounds like what you're feeling is this. And then we've just kind of gone, yeah, that is what I'm feeling, right? And it's such a good feeling, I think, when people can do that and we feel like someone's connected with us at that level. And the last one, support self-efficacy. It goes back to the last point with empowerment. So self-efficacy and empowerment kind of go hand in hand. So many people have probably tried to change whatever it is you're working with them on, but they might have had very unsuccessful attempts, and they might feel kind of beat up or sort of downtrodden about those attempts, right? Oh, I'm a failure. I've tried to quit this before. I've tried to change this behavior, and it never works. So one way we can help with self-efficacy is to sort of shift their attention or focus a little bit. So highlight what their strengths are. It's like, okay, well, you're saying you're really struggling with this, but I've noticed that you're really good at, you're really organized, right? Or you're really good at sort of insight and reflecting. So pointing out what their strengths are, and then finding ways to be able to use those strengths toward committing to change. And also reflecting on other times they have succeeded. Like, hey, I'm listening, and I'm hearing you say you feel really beaten up by this thing that you've tried to change multiple times. Let's take a step back and maybe talk about a time in your life where you did feel really good and you succeeded at change. Tell me about that situation. What was different about that situation? What helped you in that situation? So to be able to help them reframe or see the problem in a way that relies on a past success. Ultimately, I think it's our belief in their power to change and reinforcing that can be a major tool to use to help them change, right? So I had a mentor that would often say, sometimes we have to allow people to borrow our faith or our courage or our belief in the other person. I've noticed this a lot when I'm doing like exposure therapy for anxiety. Sometimes I really have to like hype people up and say like, hey, you're doing great right now. Like you're really anxious. This thing that we're doing is very difficult, but you're handling it really well. And I think you're really gonna succeed at this thing. So now to talk about empathic listening specifically, and I think probably my personal favorite strategy of motivational interviewing is using ORS. So ORS stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summarizing listening. So open-ended questions are important for a couple of reasons. One, it allows us to gather more information than we would if we were asking closed-ended questions. And it also allows us to sort of understand someone's feelings or attitudes about a certain subject. So examples of open-ended questions are things like, what would you like to change about your life? What changes have you tried to make? What have been barriers for you to seek help? This is the opposite of closed-ended questions, which are like, have you ever tried to change? Yes. No. right? We're likely to get one word or very brief answers that aren't going to give us a lot of valuable data. And I even encourage you to start maybe practicing by using open-ended questions just in general. I remember when I was in graduate school, we actually had to do an exercise where we had to try to do like a full 5 minutes or 10 minutes of only asking open-ended questions. And it's actually really hard. Our conversations in general with like family and friends and things tend to contain a lot of closed-ended questions because we have an active engagement in that conversation, right? We want to be there. So we can ask closed-ended questions because we recognize that people might give open-ended answers. You know, how's your day? Good. I could leave it at that, but I gotta say, oh, it's pretty good. This happened today, and this happened today. But when we're dealing with people who might be ambivalent, or you're still trying to build trust with them, or they don't really want to be there, asking closed-ended questions is going to get you a closed-ended response, right? They're not really going to want to elaborate. But if you ask open-ended questions, it's going to open the door for them to try to give you more valuable information. So the next point in OARS is affirmations. So affirmations really help the client to overcome whatever self-sabotaging or negative thinking that they might be dealing with that's preventing them from moving forward with change. So affirmations include things like compliments or appreciation and understanding, validating and supporting them, and noting the person's strengths and efforts. So that could look like, you know, hey, I understand this has been a real struggle for you. It seems like it's really difficult. At the same time, you came here today, right? You reached out for help. So it seems like some part of you is motivated for change. Maybe you just don't know the exact steps you need to take yet. But I've noticed in working with you so far that you seem to be someone who's, you know, positive or hardworking, you have a good work ethic, you're organized, you're tenacious, whatever it may be. And those are going to be things that we're going to work with together to help you make the change that you want to make. The next one is reflective listening. So we've kind of already talked a little bit about this in an indirect way. So this just helps express the ambivalence and help the client kind of see their own ambivalence by talking about it out loud. So rephrasing their statements to capture implicit meaning and feeling. Like, hey, you're telling me that you really want to make this change in your life, but it's been very difficult for you to make this change. You recognize that the benefits to making this change are X, Y, and Z, but right now it's difficult for you to make this change because your barriers are X, Y, and Z. It also encourages them to kind of explore their own lives and helps them understand their own motivations. Summative listening, to be able to summarize. So basically, it allows us to collect the information that's been said so far. It reflects on earlier parts of the discussion and draw together a central message for the conversation. So oftentimes summarizing is about us making sure we've got everything right. Like, hey, so far you've told me this, this, and this. You want to make this change. Here are your barriers. Here are the advantages. Do I have that right? So it's a chance for us to make sure that we're truly understanding what the client is trying to tell us. It allows us to maybe connect pieces back together. Okay, well, now you're telling me this. Earlier, you said that this was a motivation for change. So now we've got a couple of reasons that you want to be motivated for change, right? You want to be able to engage with your family more. You want to be able to be more independent. You want to be able to live on your own. You want to be able to drive a car, whatever it may be, to start linking those things together so that the reasons for change seem like they might be more impactful to the person. Like, okay, yeah, I never really thought about those things together, but if I can change, I can have all of those things. So part of empathic listening is to be able to identify specific change talk, right? So as you're listening to a person, what are some things to listen out for that might suggest that a person wants to change, or what can we use to harness talking to them about their change? So the acronym we're going to use here is DARN CAT. So the D stands for desire. So this is expressions about why a change might be good or helpful for the person. Well, I really want to be more independent, or I really wish I could return to driving again. I wish I could live on my own again, whatever it may be. Ability, so how they would go about making the change. I could reach out to vocational rehab. I could look into a smoking cessation program. I could go out and buy Nicorette gum, right? So the person starting to identify steps that they could make to be able to implement the change they want to make. Reason, so these are the best reasons for change, and this is what we're looking for that should help be sufficient to motivate the person. So I would really feel better if I could quit smoking, or I would feel better if I could live independently again. My family would benefit if I could make this change. The next is need. So what is the level of importance to them in this moment? So I ought to's, I really shoulds. So this can help you see how interested are they in making this change right now? Well, I really ought to quit smoking, but it's not really on my radar right now. So that's sort of that low importance. Or I really should stop smoking now because it's really starting to affect my health in some way. Commitment. So how likely are they to actually enact the plan? So I am going to, I promises. So when they start making these sort of affirmations, that's a good sign. Listen for that kind of language. You know what, after the session today or after this talk, I'm feeling a lot better. I think I'm going to go call this person. I'm going to go obtain this object. Or I promise to think more about what you said today. Activation, also sometimes this is called actuation. So these are statements about the actual willingness to change. I'm ready to. I will start tomorrow. Let's get this going. I'm excited about this plan. Those kind of conversations allow you to know that they're closer to that preparation or that action stage and that they're ready to make or implement a change. And the last one is actually taking steps. So any statements about action taking. So you see someone one week, you see them the next week, and they come back and they say, hey, I actually went out and did that thing we talked about. Now I feel a lot better about it. Or this weekend I started doing my stretches again, or I reached out to some physical therapists to start re-engaging in physical activity. So eliciting change talk, right? So when someone has given us some of the information that we're looking for, how can we then take that and kind of harness that a little bit into actually helping them implement the changes? So variables of change talk, if you hear someone talking about the disadvantages of the status quo, or if you want to highlight the disadvantages of the status quo, you're doing this thing, but you don't really want to change it quite yet. So some questions you might ask are, what worries you about this, right? What worries you about not engaging in more physical activity? What worries you about your drug use? What difficulties have resulted from your drug use? What difficulties have resulted from you being more physically inactive? In what ways does your drug use or inactivity or whatever it may be concern you? Then when we talk about the disadvantages of maintaining the status quo, we can talk about, well, what are the advantages of change? How would you like your life to be in 5 years? What are the advantages of changing your physical activity, your drug habits? What would be different in your life if you made these changes? The next is sort of optimism for change, right? When you have made significant change, when have you made significant change in your life before? How did you do it back then? What's helped you in the past get over difficult tasks? What strengths do you have to help you change? What are some of your strengths? How do we implement those strengths in this conversation? And then the last one are questions that can elicit intention to change. So in what ways do you want your life to be different in 5 years? If you could do anything without any of your current barriers, if you could change anything or do anything, what would you change? How would you change it? So again, trying to help them recognize that if we could somehow find a way to remove all the barriers you perceive, what ways could your life be better? What changes would you make if we could manage to find a way to rectify all of the disadvantages you perceive? Okay. So now I want to turn it over here a little bit and discuss some vignettes that I kind of created just to talk about our way through some problems or how we might use motivational interviewing with some things that I've seen or some ways that I've used motivational interviewing with clients or patients I've worked with in the rehabilitation setting. So this first vignette, let's say that you're introduced to a 15-year-old recently injured male with like a T10 Asia A SCI. He and his parents both seem resistant to the idea of peer support, maybe to the level that they're almost offended by it, that they were even consulted to begin with, and now that you're there to try to talk to them. They exclaim to you, "Our son doesn't need this. He will walk out of here. We aren't ready to give up yet." This is one that we see a lot at Shepherd Center. I don't know if this is one that other people have seen, but how might you use motivational interviewing in this situation?
If anybody in the audience would like to give their feedback and thoughts on this vignette, please feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, and I will take you off of mute. Okay, Melanie, go ahead.
Hi, I was injured back in 2003, and I did go to Shepherd Center, and I was similar to that age. I was probably about by the time I got to Shepherd Center, I just turned 17, and I was actually a C 4-5. So I had similar situations like this, and a lot of times when they would confront me about like what this is talking about, it always felt as if I were to converse with even the thought of this topic, then that means that I myself don't believe in getting better. It's just, you know what I'm saying? It took a long time for me to realize that, hey, finding what can make things easier or beneficial right now doesn't mean that you're not still looking for ways to progress and get better in the future. You know what I'm saying? So it was a little bit of a mental trick with me. It was hard for me to get, you can do both without feeling like you were giving up, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And I would say that's the circumstance that a lot of families feel like they're in this specific scenario, right? They feel like that's the message that we're sending, right? That we're telling them that they need to give up and that this is it.
Yeah.
Any specific strategies that you might use to try to open up the conversation, or maybe to try to get them to understand why you're there?
Well, one of the main reasons, and I've gone into discussions with so many people about this, is that generally, I mean, at least in mine and a few of my friends' experience, we generally, within the first month at being at Shepherd or at any facility, we're told roughly about 3 to 4 times, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do this. Because a lot of times therapists and even doctors will have this idea of textbook, like you're this specific.
Oh, I think you're cutting out.
Wait a minute, why can't I do, why can't I at least try, So if there's a way to get across that, that it's okay to try these different avenues, you know what I mean? It would be better than to always be told no with this and try to push a specific thing to do.
Yes. So kind of what I hear you saying is not having judgment, not being the authority figure in the situation, telling people what they're going to do or what they'll benefit from, and sort of listening to them on what they feel like they need, and asking for permission, right? I think that's an
Yeah.
important part of motivational interviewing.
Yeah, because I actually was at Shepherd Center, and I was given a doctor's visit to go to. And my doctor had requested that I go there because I needed an extensive type of therapy because of my injury. And when I got there, he asked me why I was on a specific medication. And when I told him, before I could even get 2 words out, he had basically said, no, you can't do anything here. One day you'll roll over, break your back, and die, basically. And I'm like, wow, okay. And when I confronted that, I'm like, why are you being so harsh with this? He's like, he started going in this spiel about how his parents searched everywhere and he's still in the chair. And I'm like, all right, he's got his own bitterness. So I just never spoke with him again. And I didn't go back, so it was just I'm like, wait a minute. I mean, there's great therapists and I've met some great people there, but it was a little bit of I don't know if I want to put myself under his care again,
Yeah, and I think that's an important consideration when we talk about why motivational interviewing is such an important and powerful thing, is because you're not the first person that's had an experience like that where they're just like, whoa, I'm not dealing with this person ever again, because you felt like you were pushed into something.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like if you don't have an ability to understand what you're okay with, how can you sit there and speak with someone about what they're okay with when you may not really have dealt with your own problems? And it kind of vents off onto other people.
Thank you so much, Melanie. We're going to move on to Jason. Let me just unmute you and go ahead, Jason.
Yes. Can you hear me? Everything good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
With this, I would say, from my perspective, I would look at it and I would like to affirm their positivity for at least for not giving up, because that's a great attitude to have, that you're willing to work, and someone that's willing to work like that is a great place to start. And then I might use some of my own experiences and say something to the effect of, while we all hope that your son does get up and walk, for me, I wish I'd spent a little bit of time trying to plan just in case, and being delicate around that situation, but also saying, and maybe creatively saying, like, your goal to walk out of here can be broken down into smaller goals that we can work on now for more effective, or not more effective, for effective things that would be helpful to the recovery now, but could also help to that goal in the future of walking.
Yeah, in a way, that's also rolling with resistance, right? You're kind of recognizing what their barriers are and where they're trying to draw a line in the sand with the team, and saying, okay, well, that's okay. We're not telling you that that's not true or that's not the case. So you're highlighting their strengths, right? You're recognizing that they are very motivated to work very hard. So you're already highlighting that. And then saying, okay, well, we're not saying that you're not going to walk out of here, you're not going to reach that goal, but maybe it would be beneficial for you to learn some of the things, because that could help you toward that goal.
Yeah, that's a really hard one to me.
That
one feels so delicate and hard, because so many people just are so resistant to that at first. It's that's a difficult one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if you wanted to move on to the next vignette.
To the next one. So let's say, and this is another one I've encountered, a family member of an adult peer you're mentoring comes to you with concerns that their loved one is self-medicating their depression with maybe pain pills, and has also begun drinking more heavily than before. The peer has been, quote unquote, doctor shopping, and appears to be using manipulative tactics to secure more medication. So there's some sort of behavior that suggests that they're trying to get more medication than they should be, and maybe they're overusing their medication. And then we'll get to the bonus here in a second. I just want to see how people kind of react to that initial vignette.
And if you'd like to weigh in, you can just click on the raise hand function and I'll take you off of mute. And I think Jason would again like to give his thoughts on this one.
Yes, because this was me. This was me when I was first injured. And I think one of the things that you went over that's really good here would be to reflect on what they're telling you. If you're talking to, I guess it depends on if you're talking to the peer or the family member, but if I was talking to the peer, I would say, I see you using some self-medication. I see you drinking more. What's going on? What's bothering you, or what kind of things how is this helping your current situation maybe, and start from there. And then from there, you could use some of the techniques you talked about, like saying, well, like if they have longer term goals, point out how drinking is going to affect so much of your health and make so much more about like living independently. It makes all of these things so much more difficult, and kind of motivating them through those tactics would be how I would go at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are great recognitions, right? So at the beginning, it's the recognition that whatever they're doing is benefiting them in some way, right? That's an important part of motivational interviewing, is recognizing it doesn't matter how self-destructive a behavior is. Chances are, if we engage in it because it serves some sort of purpose. And maybe what I need to recognize is that there are other ways to manage that thing. But we're not going to get there if you come at me and attack me by saying like, oh, this is awful for you, you should stop doing it.
Right.
Thank you, Jason. And Patrick, I am going to unmute you. And Patrick, I think if you want to go ahead.
I think you clicked for me.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I didn't know if you meant to click me or not. It just popped up for me to unmute, and I'm like, okay, I'm Patrick.
Okay. Let me just try. Let me just see if we can get Patrick here. Patrick, did you have anything you wanted to add to the conversation? Because I think you are not on mute. Okay, Melanie, did you want to go ahead?
Yes, a lot of I've had similar instances with my family as well. Not personally with me with medications or drinking, but family members that have had that same situation. And I mean, it wasn't with a spinal cord injury, but he had damaged his knee. And when one ran out, he went to turned to the street to get it. And one thing after another, he accidentally killed somebody that tried to mug him. And it was just one thing after another, and it just kept him on a spiral going down. But one thing that I noticed that most people never really ask is, instead of focusing on what they're doing right now, they never really ask, where did it stem from? Like what made you feel like you needed to do this first thing, stuff like that. Because there's a lot of times no one really cared to ask me. They always assumed my problem, or if I was upset about something, it was because of my wreck, or it's because of whatever. And I'm like, not every emotion you experience in a wheelchair is going to stem from your accident or your injury at all. There's a lot of things, like people are multi, aspects. So to me, it's like, instead of assuming that their frustration is from their situation, it could be something that's underlined that is not as noticeable physically.
Yeah, so we don't want to assume a person's reasons for doing something or why they might be feeling a certain way, right? And like, let's say, for example, that our person in this situation, our hypothetical peer, has tried to get help in other ways, but felt like no one really understood where they were coming from, because everybody assumed that their problem was due to their injury when maybe it wasn't. And then a person with that kind of experience might want to shut down or not go back to their family or whomever for support if they don't feel like that person understands where they're coming from.
Okay, and Patrick wanted to add that he might start off saying, have you been doing so well with your recovery? What has changed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so kind of starting with a positive, acknowledging that they've come a long way and that maybe they're doing pretty well, but all of a sudden there's this change and you want to talk about it. So a couple of reasons I like that. It's an open-ended question. You're highlighting a positive there. So absolutely, I think that would be a great way to start the conversation. So just real quick, let's say for like a bonus, some time has passed. The peer has been denied pain medications by their doctor, so now they're not getting any pain medications. Drinking persists, and there is concern that the person, he or she, may be trying to secure illicit pain medications from the street. Does this change the way you approach the situation?
Okay, just waiting to see if anyone else wanted to chime in on the bonus. No, I don't see anyone else chiming in.
That's
I guess
okay. I think.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say we're heading towards 4:30, so I just wanted to open the floor for just a couple of minutes for any questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask Dr. Brown about the information, all the fantastic information that's been presented today. Okay, see here.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Yvonne. Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you.
I just wanted to know, it was such great information. And I wanted to chime in on some of the other stuff, but a lot of it was covered already, what I wanted to say. But is any of that presentation going to be available to us as a resource for future, interactions with some of our encounters?
Oh, I can say that a recording of this webinar will be available on the Reeve Foundation's YouTube channel. And we'll be sending out everyone who registered and to everyone who attended today a link to that recording.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very end, there is a resource here. Let me progress here real quick. So this handout for foundational motivational interviewing skills, it's basically a one PDF sheet of everything I covered today that has all the acronyms on it and the things that you might want to use or implement. I mean, I'll tell you right now, I've got like a little card for motivational interviewing that was given to me years ago. And sometimes I'll keep this in my little folder I carry with me around just in case I need to pull this out and remember a specific strategy. So that'll be in there too.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Jason, looks like Jason has a question.
Yeah, my question kind of pertains to how to know. So if you're dealing with someone that is particularly resistant to help, and you've been working with them a while and they're continually resistant, how do you find that delicate balance, or what tips do you have for the balance between pushing them and allowing them to move at their own pace?
I think it kind of comes back to that idea of sort of a gentle pointing out. I don't really want to use the term confrontation, but just a gentle reflective statement. It's like, hey, I've noticed that you've engaged in this. What about that, makes you want to engage in that? What are the benefits of this thing? What are the disadvantages of this thing? And if you don't really see a lot of change talk emerge, if that person's in a pre-contemplative state of change, chances are they're not going to change until they're ready to change. So I think you can express empathically, like, hey, I'm kind of worried about this thing. I just want you to know that I'll be here for you if you ever want to talk about it. If you ever want to explore something different. If you ever want help with this thing, please reach out to me. Right. So I think we have to resist that urge to constantly maybe want to help them, even if it's something self-destructive. Like, you have to be able to have something to latch on to in order to be able to initiate that conversation.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
Well, with that, we will wrap up today's presentation. Did you have anything else to add, Dr. Brown?
Not specifically. I just want to thank everybody for allowing me to come out. I love doing these things. I love these educational based webinars. So I hope you did get some valuable information today. But thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you so much. We really enjoy these presentations very much. And I know that they're very helpful and useful for our peer mentors. So thank you so much. And I just wanted to again remind everyone that we'll have a recording of this webinar available on our YouTube channel within the next few days. You'll get a link to that. And I'll also send you out, make sure that I include in the email the link to the handout that you can see there on the resources page. And with that, we'll wrap up today's webinar. I just want to thank everyone again so much for joining us today. Again, a big thank you to Dr. Brown for a wonderful presentation. And everybody just enjoy the rest of your day and take care.